Wasn't as participant period. Hello and welcome everyone to the Californians for the Arts, Culture and Creativity Month convening. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone here today and really getting excited to start the day and get things going. And before I do, just want to say thank you to Charles McPherson. He's a jazz legend living in California, and we're happy to be able to have shared his music today. Thank you, and I will pass it on over to Jessica.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone for being here today. Californians for the Arts has arranged for all meetings today to offer live captioning. I've turned that feature on for you right now for your convenience. If you prefer to turn that feature off, go ahead under the live transcript button and you can change and alter your preferences for your personal comfort. I want to direct everyone today to the chat box located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. During this webinar, this will be the best way to communicate with your fellow participants and panelists. Please go ahead, do me a favor, test it out by introducing yourself and sharing how you're affiliated with the arts community. Just like in-person meetings, Californians for the Arts expects that all attendees represent themselves and treat all co-attendees with mutual respect. As you review the slide on the screen, understand that Californians for the Arts recognizes that radical change is required to address the centuries of racial, economic, social, and cultural injustice in our state and in our country. As the only comprehensive multidisciplinary organization focused on advancing and building public awareness of the value of the arts, culture, and creativity in California, we acknowledge the necessity of conducting ourselves with attention to these histories and their ongoing impacts. During the program today, the chat box will remain open during the entire session. We have a full day of programming, and we have many people that we're going to be thanking today. Before we go ahead and jump into the programming, I want to give an idea of what you are most interested in today and which session you might be most interested in attending, other than this one, which we know you're here for. So I'm going to go ahead and pop up a poll and ask you that, in addition to sharing where you're from, answer the poll and share what you're interested in looking forward to. I've popped open that poll. We'd love to hear what you're looking forward to. And at this time, I want to go ahead and introduce Julie Baker, Executive Director for the Californians for the Arts.
Good morning, Jessica and Matt Carney, who is our programs director, who started off today this morning. Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone for being here. My name is Julie Baker. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm coming today from the land of the Nevada City Rancheria Nisenan, who are currently fighting for their federal recognition to be reinstated. Welcome to Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month. In 2019, the California Senate proclaimed a concurrent resolution for every April to be our month to celebrate and share the impact of our sector and what it brings to every community and every person in California. As we continue after 14 months of virtual performances, meetings, professional development, and most recently Advocacy Week, thanks to all who participated, we acknowledge that Zoom burnout is real and thank everyone for taking the time to be with us today. I also want to thank our statewide board of 27 excellent and passionate arts leaders, our small but mighty staff, Ari, Jada, Lisha, Matt, and Tara, our contractor team of Jesse and Jessica, and acknowledge our annual sponsors who keep our programs free for all. The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, the Kenneth Rainin Foundation, the Walter and Elise Haas Fund, the Rosenthal Family Foundation, and the California Arts Council, our state arts agency. It is my pleasure to now introduce Ron P. Murriera, Vice President of Californians for the Arts Board, co-founder of San Jose Arts Advocates, and owner of RPM Consulting.
Thank you so much, Julie. It's a pleasure to be here this morning with everyone. I am Ron P. Murriera. I am the Board Vice President of Californians for the Arts. My pronouns are he and his, and I come to you this morning from the indigenous territories of the Muwekma Ohlone. I know that we have our land acknowledgement right now. Our representative has been having difficulty coming into the Zoom. I don't know if he's joined us. Is he here? Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Well, hi, Antonio. Great to have you. It is my pleasure right now to introduce Antonio Ruiz. And Antonio has joined us. He's a staff at the United Auburn Indian Community of Auburn Rancheria, currently serving on the Wilton Rancheria's Tribal Council. Mr. Ruiz has worked in tribal preservation for many years, working in a collaborative effort with local, state, and federal agencies to protect tribal cultural resources. He continues to practice traditional ways of life through language, dancing, singing, and has an interest in native plant uses. I turn it over right now to Mr. Antonio Ruiz for our land acknowledgement this morning. Welcome, Antonio.
Good morning and thank you. Kuchi Hiama, Onexekan, Oyasekan, Antonio Ruiz. Good day, my relatives. My name is Antonio, and I'm the Community Heritage Specialist for the United Auburn Indian Community of Auburn Rancheria, and also a tribal member of Wilton Rancheria. Today, I ask for permission to be here on Miwok, Nisenan, and Maidu lands. I want to thank the California for the Arts organization for inviting me here today and acknowledging the indigenous people of this land, which is now known as Sacramento County, and the people who come from different backgrounds, beliefs, and walks of life to join this wonderful event. In my culture, we open up events such as this by acknowledging the land and ancestors who come before us as a matter of respect and as a reminder to be mindful of how the past, present, and future connects us. Prior to colonial presence in the Nisenan, Maidu, and Miwok territory, the area that is now the state capital was a thriving center for tribes all over the region, such as Pashuni, Veshnok, Momo, and Sama, to name a few. This was and still is today a place of art, culture, business, and community. We understood the significance of balance then, and we strive for it now. I ask that you move forward with your gathering today with goodness in your hearts, an open mind, and with respect for indigenous stewards of your communities. Thank you, Wangai. Thank you. And I'll turn it back over to Ron.
Thank you so much, Antonio, for blessing us with the land acknowledgement this morning and for joining us for our convening. I'll turn it over to now.
Thank you, Ron.
Julie.
Yes. Thanks, Ron, and thank you, Antonio. That was so important to start our day with that centering and for that reminder. Our work here at California for the Arts centers around building awareness of the value and impact of the arts, culture, and creative industries and arts workers. Our goal today is to inform, educate, and inspire you to become consistently engaged in arts advocacy. Consistently. We understand not everyone has the tools, the time, or the history of civic engagement, and that becoming an advocate is a process. To take the temperature of the audience, we'd like to see how confident or experienced you feel today as an arts advocate. And I believe we are going to run another poll. Is that right, Jessica?
That is right. I'm pulling up the poll right now. So give me 2 seconds.
And for everyone who does events, we know that even though it's virtual, this is still live. So we know that there'll be some things here and there as we go along throughout the day. We have 9 sessions today. So here is a poll, if you could do on a scale of 1 to 5, how confident do you consider yourself as an arts advocate? And this is helpful for us because we're also going to do it at the end of the day for those of you who can attend throughout the day. I want to give you a sense of where we are right now. So we are right now in a historic moment. We have a once in a generation opportunity in the state of California to advocate for and realistically achieve a significant investment in the creative industries. Facing a budget surplus and a $26 billion in American Rescue Plan funding from the federal government, our lobbying partner, California Arts Advocates, and with California Association of Museums and National Independent Venue Association California, we've all joined forces in a $1 billion funding ask of the California government to invest back into the recovery of the arts and culture industries. This funding would benefit the recovery of the entire cultural sector, nonprofit cultural art organizations, art businesses, museums, independent venues, as well as individual artists and creative workers, with an emphasis on communities of color that have been historically underfunded. We've also asked for a general fund allocation of $1 per capita increase for the state arts agency, the California Arts Council, as we are currently 73 cents per capita. We are also excited to sponsor our first bill, Senate Bill 628, authored by Senator Allen, the California Creative Workforce Act, which would support a living wage employment opportunities for unemployed arts workers and an investment in a workforce program to create a pipeline of new creative workers. A bill that recognizes artists are essential workers. We also support Senate Bill 805, a bill for small nonprofit arts organizations to create a payroll and paymaster service grants. It's authored by Senator Susan Rubio, an innovative solution to the impact of AB 5 to create opportunities for emerging performers, playwrights, and arts workers while ensuring the survival of small theaters across California. This just gives you a highlight of some of the things that we're working on in terms of our direct advocacy, and then of course that we'll be touching upon and asking for your support as we go through this process throughout this year. So I do have another poll here. Have you signed on? With this, we have done a letter campaign. Have you signed on in support of the $1 billion ask? And if you could answer that poll, that would be really helpful for us. I'd now like to introduce our board president, Victoria Hamilton, and a dynamic leader who has been with the organization for over, I think, a dozen years, and who has been in arts advocacy for decades, both at the national level and in her hometown of San Diego and across the great state of California. Welcome, Victoria.
Thank you, Julie. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming today and joining the movement. I'd like to let you know that we are dedicating Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month and our advocacy efforts in 2021 to the late Larry Baza, who passed away from COVID. Many of you know Larry was the chair of the California Arts Council. His accomplishments are many. He's recognized as an arts warrior, a change maker, a community leader, a diplomat, and a champion of social justice issues and individual artists. So our thoughts are with you, Larry. You are so beloved. Rest in power. Now it's my opportunity again to thank our convening sponsors, Claire Rose Foundation, Arts and Culture of the City of Sacramento, Jill G. Hall, Arts of LA, and Western States Arts Foundation. Now it's my pleasure to introduce to you San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria. He will share with you his origin story, as well as his trajectory in public service. By his example, you will understand the importance of educating and engaging public officials at all levels of government. He will also give you tips for success in advocacy. Every day is Arts and Culture Advocacy Day. So thank you for joining the movement today and every day. Please welcome Mayor Todd Gloria. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Todd Gloria, Mayor of the City of San Diego. And I want to extend a warm welcome to each of you. And I want to thank you for your presence here at the 3rd Annual State Arts, Culture, and Creativity Virtual Convening. Growing up, my parents taught me a valuable lesson, that you should leave things better than you found them. This is a motto that has guided my life and shaped my career in public service. In high school, I was lucky enough to have been accepted into the Aaron Price Fellows Program, a local nonprofit that changed my life. And this is where I met my mentor, Susan Davis, who would later become Assembly Member and then Congressmember Davis. She gave me my first job in government and the experience I needed to run for office myself. During my 8 years on the City Council, I became the council president and was even interim mayor for 8 months. And with the support of the community, we were able to author a landmark climate action plan and raise the minimum wage. When I termed out, I was elected to the California State Assembly, where I served for 4 years and was named Majority Whip, as well as Vice Chair of the California Legislative LGBTQ Caucus. But being in Sacramento 4 days a week taught me that my heart has always been in my hometown of San Diego, and I was honored to be elected San Diego's 37th mayor last November. I'm proud to represent this city for so many reasons, one of which is our vibrant art scene. Growing up in San Diego gave me the opportunity to be exposed to artists from a very young age. As a kid in the 1980s, I can recall taking a field trip to the San Diego Museum of Art to see the Fabergé eggs collection. Our mayor at the time helped to bring them to San Diego. And it taught me at an early lesson about how a mayor can be an advocate for art. Not only does art have a positive impact on our culture and tourism, it brings communities together, and it's one of the many things that makes San Diego unique. That's why within my Back to Work SD budget, I've created a plan to help stimulate the local arts economy, which includes funding to arts and cultural tourism, facilitate safe reopening of cultural centers through the use of public outdoor space or municipal facilities like libraries, promote binational cultural collaboration, establishing creative economy training pathways for young people, streamline permitting and reduced fees for placemaking projects, funding programming that promotes youth well-being through the arts, and lastly, investing in public art and community facilities with a focus on underserved neighborhoods. Together, we're going to reinvigorate art in San Diego. And that means that we have to work together. Over the years, I've gotten a sense for what works when advocating on your behalf. The best tip that I can give you is to stay connected to your elected officials year-round. While it's common to reach out when funding and voting cycles begin, we want to know how our support of your efforts is going throughout your journey. And we love to see the joy that art brings to our communities. Build the relationships and show your elected officials your passion for arts and culture. Through your efforts, we can have local art leave an impression on San Diegans the way those Fabergé eggs made an impression on me all those years ago. As art advocates, know that your voice matters. I look forward to seeing how you will use your creativity at every turn and make art come alive for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Gloria. That was terrific. And thank you to the San Diego advocates for their hard work to get that type of focus from your mayor in terms of the arts. So we'll return back now as Jessica gets us back to who we are here now in our next portion of the opening session. It is my pleasure to introduce panelists from the first part. So Jeff Chang is Vice President of Narrative, Arts and Culture for Race Forward and a contributing writer to the Cultural New Deal. Jeff is an author whose books include Who We Be, A Cultural History of Race and Post-Civil Rights America, We Gonna Be All Right, Notes on Race and Resegregation, and Can't Stop, Won't Stop, A History of the Hip Hop Generation, named one of the best nonfiction books of the last quarter century. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Next, I'd like to introduce Maria León de León, President and CEO of the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture. In January 2013, President Obama appointed Ms. de León to serve on the National Council on the Arts. In 2012 and 2013, Ms. de León was named among the nation's 50 most powerful and influential people in the nonprofit arts. She serves on the board of the First Peoples Fund, the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies, and the Performing Arts Alliance. Please welcome Maria. Next, I'd like to introduce Matthew Lee Erbach, writer, actor, illustrator, and co-founder and director of government affairs and public policy for Be an Arts Hero and Arts Workers United. He has led multiple national efforts to make relief and recovery for arts and culture workers an economic and legislative priority, including the Dawn Act, Revive and Rebuild, hashtag Arts Are My Superpower, and a letter writing campaign with America's Playwrights. Welcome, Matthew. Next up is Jenny Coons, theater director and organizer. Jenny has been a facilitator and educator in creating anti-racist spaces and engaging in conversations around race and equity for over a decade in both nonprofit and artistic spaces. She is a steering committee member of the Ghostlight Project, founded and leads Let's Talk About Hard Stuff, an AAPI anti-racist affinity space, and is a co-author of the open letter to Biden-Harris demanding cabinet-level representation for arts and culture, organized by Be an Arts Hero. This letter has been signed by 10,071 arts workers and 18 organizations and labor unions. Welcome, Jenny. Next up, Michael Strickland. Michael is the CEO of Bandit Lights, a full-service design, management, and producer of live events, theatrical productions, and live shows. In 1999, CNN USA Today named Michael as an Entrepreneur of the Year. But since March of 2020, Michael's worked nonstop as an advocate for the live events industry on Capitol Hill. What began as a couple of articles in trade magazines transformed into a full-blown lobbying effort with an industry email chain of 1.3 million people. Michael helped craft the CARES Act, PPP, and was a fierce advocate for the Restart Act. Michael, along with two others, set up We Make events and illuminated over 2,500 buildings nationwide, and to call attention to the plight of the industry. And on December 15th, he testified on Capitol Hill at a hearing entitled Examining the Impact of COVID-19 on the Live Event Entertainment Industry. His fierce advocacy has led many to refer to him as Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Welcome, Michael. And finally, Nina Oslo Tuncelli is both Chief of Government and Public Affairs at Americans for the Arts, as well as the Director of the Americans for the Arts Action Fund. For 27 years, Nina has served as the Chief Policy, Political, and Advocacy Strategist for the organization, mobilizing more than 450,000 arts activist members in advancing arts in America. She also spearheads the Arts Vote, Make Your Vote campaign with customized state voter fact sheets and social media ads to educate voters on all the new rules and deadlines to vote this year because of the pandemic. Welcome, panelists. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Good morning. Thanks for being here. Yay. I know how busy you all are, so thank you for making the time. If you will indulge me for a moment, I'm just going to kind of set the scene, and then I'm going to point some questions your way. So in the last year, it is safe to say arts advocacy has changed. We went from a place of trying to either protect annual investment in the arts at the federal and state level, or trying to grow them modestly to a place of urgency and survival for our sector. This galvanized the field into action, and new groups such as National Independent Venues Association and Be an Arts Hero emerged with policies to address the impact of COVID-19, such as the $16 billion Shuttered Venues Operators Grant Program, and demands, as Jenny and others made, for a cabinet-level Department for Arts and Culture. Coalitions have formed. People who never worked before in politics or in influencing policy and funding opportunities have gotten involved. We've added to the case making of the economic and social benefit of the arts an emphasis on arts as labor and artists as workers to be valued and supported, and the recognition and prioritization that without racial equity, we will not achieve cultural equity. The pandemic highlighted the fragile nature of our arts ecosystem and exposed the inequities with disproportionate impact and lack of access to funding and resources to rural communities and communities of color. We learned that half of nonprofit arts organizations had less than 2 months of working capital going into the pandemic, and that 55% of all creative workers have no savings to fall back on. Clearly, there are larger problems than just reopening that we must look to policy to solve. Alongside arts advocates that have worked for decades to build the narrative that arts are essential to our economy, social impact, and emotional well-being, the nation finally felt what it was like to live without us. Therein lies an opportunity. We must capitalize on things before they go back to quote unquote normal. And the public sector looks to private foundations, corporations, and individuals to take care of the arts once again, which studies show only perpetuates inequality and lack of widespread access to the arts. As California looks to reopen here after June 15th, for those of you who are not in California, we're possibly doing that. We must not just restart the arts, but build back with a prioritization of racial equity and systems to truly support the working artist. Michael Road, lead artist for Civic Imagination for the Center for Performance and Civic Practice, wrote in an open letter to local elected officials, artists are often called on in times of crisis and recovery to bring their expertise to 3 areas: communication, connectivity, and hope, end quote, sorry. This has never been more clear than this last year. Although we can all agree that arts and artists are essential, our policies and system tend to thank and give applause, but not invest in artists to provide equitable living wage work opportunities. We need to end the paradigm and romanticization of the starving artist and support the era of the thriving artist. We need to educate policymakers that artist work takes prolonged commitment and rigorous discipline, and their work should be valued. In this last year, we've come to fully realize, and this is one of the things that we come out a lot and talk about, that artists are second responders and that their work is an essential service we must support. We need them to bring the social and emotional wellness, the community cohesion, jobs, and economic benefit to every community across the state and nation. And today, we will engage in these conversations and more. So I'm done now. That was my sort of setting the scene of what we see here and what we've been up to here in California. So in this morning's opening session, we've invited national esteemed leaders, state leaders to give specific details on what we are advocating for today and to be informed of important legislative and budget priorities. We also hope this conversation will inspire you to become part of the arts advocacy movement. And we can talk about that too. Are we in a movement? Are we in campaigns? And hear from new and longtime leaders as they share the stories of engagement, success, and activation in support of the creative industries. All right, panelists, let's get started. So thank you. I was going to start with Maria, if I may. Tell us about the National Association of Latinos Arts and Culture and why advocacy, when I look at your work, is one of the pillars of your work. And what is your advocacy focused on right now? And if you could also share, and I know this is kind of 3 questions in one, but if you can also share, and I can repeat it too, what has COVID taught us in terms of advocating for the arts that we did not know before? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you for the invitation to be here. It's a pleasure to join you today. The National Association of Latino Arts and Cultures, NALAC, has been around serving the Latinx arts field for 32 years. We create opportunities for artists and arts leaders, organizations, culture bearers to really provide services that will help them really increase the visibility of their work and provide funds that lead to more artistic production and movement building. You know, we represent thousands of artists, hundreds of organizations across the nation, and movement building and organizing is at the core of what we do. And we know that this is long-term work. And over the 32 years, you know, we are proud of the fact that we have connected with so many artists and so many communities across the United States and Puerto Rico and Mexico and Central America and serve them with a broad array of programs. And I think that this year did not teach our communities or it was a moment of teaching, but it revealed the inequities and the racism that exist in this nation and how historically organizations of color, artists of color, communities of color have been unrecognized, have been unseen and not supported, you know. So what are the equitable strategic investments that need to be made? You know, what is the change that needs to happen to not go back to a normal way of working, but to really invest in the arts, in communities of color, to really set a way of maybe equalizing what has happened. You know, for generations, mainstream institutions have been supported and they have thrived. We need that kind of support. Communities of color need that kind of support. We need to be seen, we need to be trusted. And one of the ways, of course, that we did the work as the pandemic hit is that we work in an intercultural way. We have, you know, strategic partnerships with long-term partnerships with Alternate Roots, SIP Culture, First Peoples Fund, PAI Foundation, NALAC. We created several years ago an Intercultural Leadership Institute to build solidarity and really increase our advocacy efforts with a broader range of intercultural voices. And we also were part, you know, working with Jeff and Fabiana and others, part of creating the Cultural New Deal. And so this is a time to reassess and not go back to normal. And we're not going back to normal. And it is a time to really increase our advocacy efforts and create a different policy strategy that will really recognize and support not only the arts community, but our communities. You know, it was those the farm workers, it was those frontline workers that really suffered. And that is, they are all part of our community, you know, and we created a fund together. We raised over $5 million from Mellon and another, you know, $500,000 from other funders together with this intercultural group, and provided funding and continue to provide funding to artists and organizations. And it is also that community-based funding, because there were other larger institutions providing relief funding, but many times the artists in our communities don't get seen. Who is funding those mariachis in our communities who no longer have gigs, you know? So where we needed to be strategic about how we support our communities and how we need to elevate the creativity and the vibrancy that exists in our community that has been really covered up with racism and inequity for generations.
Maria, thank you. That's such an important overview, and so many. I think it's so important that we not just go back to normal, as you say, what was quote unquote normal, but before, because I think what we've learned is what was broken. And maybe, you know, many knew it was already broken, but now I think it's been really highlighted. And I want to bring Jeff into the conversation now, because you mentioned Jeff's work and the work that you all are doing around the Cultural New Deal that came out pretty much, I think, pretty early in the pandemic, sort of in this last year as a and so maybe, Jeff, you could, you know, your work for Race Forward as the Vice President of Narrative, Arts and Culture, your focus to expand the organization's work around cultural equity and justice in the arts sector, deepen its engagement around the arts and racial justice, and advance new initiatives around cultural strategy. Can you tell us a little bit about your work, and from your perspective, what are the strategies and policies we must employ to achieve racial equity in the arts? And tell us more about the Cultural New Deal, and do you think that can transform policy conversations itself?
Can you all hear me okay? I'm worried that I'm breaking up a little bit here. Okay, cool. Thank you so much for the kind invitation to be able to be here. I just wanted to build on some points that you made, and also some points that Maria made as well, and maybe kind of give us a little bit of a different perspective here. The Cultural New Deal comes, I think, out of this. You had mentioned to start that we're in a once in a generation moment, right? In terms of thinking about how to make the case for investment in arts and culture. And I think we totally agree. I think the Cultural New Deal came exactly out of that revelation, as Maria put it, right? The pandemic, the uprisings after the murder of George Floyd really created the conditions for us to be able to see things as they really are. One of the things that I think we began to really understand is, and I think the way that you put it is that without racial equity, we can't get to cultural equity. But I think we saw the reverse, actually, that without cultural equity, we can't get to racial equity. That in fact, artists and culture bearers they're not second responders, actually. I want to challenge folks with that they're first responders, that they're folks upon whose work the vitality, the health of the communities really rest upon, right? So this is no disrespect to the doctors, the nurses, the folks who are out there, the food workers, the farm workers who are out there, who are keeping us healthy. It's to be able to make the case that arts and culture, particularly the culture of marginalized people, folks who have been shut out of the system, that within those types of cultures and within the arts are the tools that we need to be able to get through really tough times. And that's the basis of kind of coming to this notion of the Cultural New Deal, right? So going back to this notion of a once in a generation kind of investment, we think that there's a once in a generation opportunity here to be able to make a break with the structures of funding, of investment, as you put it, of staffing that reinforce inequities, that perpetuate racial injustice and cultural injustice. And that if we're able to get at this question of cultural justice, if we're able to get to this question of cultural equity, right, that we're actually going to be able to release a lot of the energies in our communities that will take us to racial justice. And that was where the Cultural New Deal came from. So it's crucial that we think about all of the work that we're doing as critical to what folks are broadly calling the recovery, right, of where we're trying to go, of the wellness of our communities. And that within that we're looking to lift up the folks who've been historically locked out, Black, Indigenous communities of color, Asian and Pacific Island, Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, Latinx communities, Arab American communities, all the folks who have been locked out, that we think about how within that we create opportunities for funding, for hiring, for investment in arts and cultural ecosystems. If we think of this as an ecosystem, as arts and culture belonging to an ecosystem, right? And that this ecosystem interacts with our health ecosystems, with our policy ecosystems, to be able to create healthy and vital communities, then we have a sense of a large vision that we can all move towards together. So the Cultural New Deal is really about investing in building healthy communities from the ground up, from recognizing the people who have been locked out of that, and beginning to think about how folks are centered, the transformations that then come with that, the bodies of knowledge and culture and creativity, the explosion of creativity that then can be unleashed. And that can help us build a better nation and a better future.
I just say yes to all of these. We say second responders partly honestly, out of the ability to get support in terms of policy building, because it is more challenging to talk to a legislator and say artists are first responders. As much as we all believe that, they'll look at it and go, no, those are certain categories, right? So and everything you just said, Jeff, was, and Rhea, both of you, I mean, I'm just so grateful you're both here for this conversation, because I think there's so much wisdom and knowledge and change that we're going to have hopefully happen in this, as you said, to rebuild a better nation. Nina, let me bring Nina into the conversation, who's been doing this work for 27 years at Americans for the Arts. So Nina, this is the challenge, right? So it's to take what Maria and Jeff are talking about and now be able to convince our policymakers, not just the people internally inside the arts sector, but externally, the ones who hold some influence here on funding, when we're talking about public investment specifically right now. What do you see in terms of have things shifted in this last year in terms of our narrative, our case making? Has COVID taught us something different in terms of how we work with our legislator bodies to affect change from your perspective?
Yeah, I think COVID has changed not only our personal lives, but it's changed the dynamics of lobbying and legislating on Capitol Hill. And bringing these issues to the forefront has been really important. Some of it requires good research capturing of how the impact of COVID has affected the arts and culture community and individual artists. And there are some great both governmental agencies and public agencies that are working on this. Great work from Johns Hopkins University and from Indiana University that puts out Giving USA in numbers of the disproportionate impact, and quite frankly, Americans for the Arts, on really kind of capturing information on specifically how it's impacting the arts, because we find that with our lobbying efforts, that's really the beginning of the conversation, is to identify where the problems are and where the gaps are, who's falling between the gaps. For example, some of the research that we're doing is specifically trying to point out the disproportionate impact on BIPOC organizations and artists. A lot of people talk about the unemployment rate. So for instance, it can be as high as 60%, depending on the discipline. It can be 45% for dance groups, and it depends geographically where you're located too in terms of that unemployment rate. But we're also capturing among BIPOC artists and organizations what the impact is. And usually it's about 10% at least higher. So for instance, if we're seeing a national average of about 60% unemployment, as high as 60%, I'm going to say, among gig artists and arts administrators, we're seeing it at 69% for BIPOC artists. The same is true with, Julie, you mentioned about lack of savings, disproportionately impact on BIPOC artists, again, of lack of that kind of savings to stabilize their homes, their families, their health. Same thing with lack of health insurance, and all of the normal necessities that we need are disproportionately being impacted on BIPOC artists. So we are bringing that kind of research to the forefront as our calling card into Congress to talk about specifically what the needs are. We're also not just working on it as with legislators, but also executive agencies. So for instance, the National Endowment for the Arts. We have brought to their attention, probably from the moment that the new political team got in there, that it was great that first round of CARES Act emergency funding that they took care of, but who got left on the cutting table in terms of not getting funding? And again, it's BIPOC organizations, because they were not previous recipients of NEA funds. And so we're really trying to bring attention, a vehicle for them to reach both BIPOC organizations and individual artists, because as as part of their legislation, they are not allowed to give direct grants to individual artists. However, the point that we're making is, I know that you have a lot of local arts agencies on the call today. We think local arts agencies are key because they do have the authority to re-grant federal dollars, that get some of this money in the hands of these local arts agencies with the directive to get it in the hands of BIPOC cultural organizations and individual artists. And we're doing that with a lot of executive agencies. So one takeaway that I want to say is lobbying is not limited to your legislators. It's lobbying the SBA. An example of here is, so gig artists were disproportionately affected by PPP. And the reason why is that they had to use this is, I know, very specific, but it means a lot in terms of money. They had to use their Schedule C to calculate how much PPP funds they could use. And the number that they had to use was their net profit, where that was really unfair because so many of them end up with a zero, sometimes a loss. What they needed to use is their gross income. So many of us got involved in a lobbying effort directly to the SBA. And as soon as the Biden administration took office, to the Biden administration to say, this is unduly unfair to gig artists. So we can see gig artists were really devastatingly impacted by this pandemic. And so a change was able to happen. By mid-February, a new form was created for PPP this year to allow gig artists to calculate their PPP based on gross income instead of net profit. It was the difference between not even qualifying because it was less than $1,000 and now getting close to $20,000, the max $20,833. So that makes a difference. The fact that we were able, with many others, to extend the extension of PPP to May 31st, what that meant is these gig artists who didn't even get a PPP in the first year in 2020 are going to be able to get 2 shots at it, both a first draw and a second draw this year. That's an example of how things have shifted. I mean, we never even talked with the SBA really before, other than making sure, you know, nonprofits were eligible, but this is a whole new game now.
Nina, it's so interesting because what it really says too is how, you know, lobbying is not a one and done. You don't just get the money, you don't just get the bill passed. There's so much more work. And that actually is a great segue to Michael. I want to introduce, because the only problem I have this morning is I have so many fantastic people who responded to the call to show up today that I want to get and make sure every one of you gets a chance to speak, and hopefully we can have a little bit more of a conversation as well. So Michael, welcome. I saw you testify in December on Capitol Hill. You've really been sort of championing the call of the production side of the live events and larger live events industry. And in your experience, because now you've really become a newer advocate in this last year, from what I've read, which narratives are working in your experience to convince policymakers to support industries and in particular the live events industries? And in your experience, what doesn't work? Like, what falls on deaf ears? What is it? What is the most persuasive thing that you're finding when you're getting in front of policymakers?
Julie, thank you very much for the question. Great question. And thank all of you for listening and for being here. I'm the guy that backed into this. This is my 53rd year in the industry. I happen to know Lamar Alexander and Marsha Blackburn, my two senators, for 40 years each. And that kind of led me to the position that I'm in. But I want to get in front of this. There are great organizations on this call. I'm here for everybody. I never came at this for one particular segment, and I'm still not, because whether you are the superstar at the top of the ladder or whether you are the individual that cleans the venue, we have an ecosystem. We have a vertically integrated system, and no one entity or no one person is any more or less important than anyone else. If we pull a piece out, it all tumbles. And going back sort of to the equity part, I have fought this fight overtly, and I have fought this fight covertly. In the last 4 months, it has been more covertly, because I have discovered the legislators prefer to sort of work out of the daylight and get the desired result because it's a little easier for them. And I now respect that. But where we are is, we as an industry, we are $877 billion a year. Arts and culture, that's everything from Indian dance to Hawaiian cultural things, to rock shows, to Broadway theater, and everything in between. I'm fighting for everybody. We're not done. What I'm doing has happened now in three phases, if you will. The first phase was to get the CARES Act passed, to get the PPP, to get the second PPP, to fight like heck for restart, and now to get SVOG, or Save Our Stages, passed. The second piece of this is to broaden Save Our Stages. And the third, and this is the most important piece of what we'll be doing going forward, you asked the question, what's important? The Airlines Association and the Restaurant Association are very successful because they've all come together. Certainly Delta and American and the different airlines all have different wants and needs, but at the moment of crisis, they come together as the Airlines Association. We must have, and I'm now working on, the Entertainment Association. Because if I've been told once in the 72 meetings I've taken with senators and/or representatives, it is this: you are in the back of the line. You don't have a PAC and you don't have a lobby. Now, individually, we do. People on this call have PACs. People on this call have lobbies. Don't stop what you're doing. It's vital. It's important. But as an industry, had we had a voice, had we had a single entity representing all of us, our situation right now would be very different. The Save Our Stages SVOG situation, we got that passed. Any of you in my email chain have noted, I have been working nonstop with the legislators. There is a phrase in there called Live Performing Arts Organization Operators. Everyone in this meeting is a live performing arts organization operator. Everyone. So everyone in this meeting should be able to participate in that. But some of the rules and some of the questions were written in a fashion that many of you got kicked out. Probably the biggest thing that I struggled with is there are a great number of phenomenal organizations that depend primarily on donations and grants. And because of the math of the application. The children's dance theaters, the actors studios, there's so many, some of these cultural, iconic cultural organizations were excluded. Because the truth of the matter is, sadly, right now, and I have fought long and hard, until we get this opened up, this money is going to go to sort of the top of the chain. And all of the diversity occurs below the top. I don't, you have to get below the venue owners, you have to get below the big managers and the big agents and the people that control the industry. And therein lies the diversity. When you get down to the actors and the dancers and the teachers and the guitar teachers and the people in the community theaters and the people in just all of the diversity occurs downstream. It's an argument that I personally made with Cedric Richmond at the White House, with Representative James Clyburn, with Senator Tim Scott, with Senator Cory Booker, with Mitch McConnell, with Chuck Schumer. And make no mistake, at this moment, the key to this expansion of Save Our Stages SVOG is Chuck Schumer. Chuck owns this. He was the champion of it. Good guy, got it done. He now knows that we need another $30 billion infused into SVOG. We need to open the gates. We need to let the Cuban dance troupe, as well as the Hawaiian situation, as well as the East Tennessee Historical Society, as well as the Bluegrass Association. I mean, there's just so many cultural iconic things out there that for one reason or another have been excluded. He's aware of this. There are a number of senators working on this, and that's kind of the good news for the day. And this is kind of underground for those of you that are in my email chain. A number of senators have assured me they know where the $30 billion is. They see the need, but I will close by saying I'm here for all of you, not just for this segment or the other segment. And even when we do get this additional, hopefully $30+ billion, the Restart Act was the thing I was so famous for fighting for, because basically anyone and everyone could come in and get 45% of your lost revenue. We eventually got the Restart Act to that point. Had we gotten the Restart Act across the finish line, I don't think a lot of these conversations would be held. But the sad part was a lot of these different vehicles had all of these caveats. Well, this is only intended for this, and this is only and it left so many people out in the cold. So I'm going to continue this fight for everybody, top to bottom, left to right. I'm not here for any one particular entity. And we're going to get this done. And when we finish getting this done, we must form the Entertainment Association, under which all of these great organizations can gather, and we can move forward and have a voice on the Hill, God forbid, next time we have a moment like this.
Thank you, Michael. It's really important that we hear kind of, first of all, you heard it here first, maybe there's another $30 billion coming to save the industry. And the other piece is, I think what's a big takeaway here is this idea of this coalition building, really representing ourselves as an industry. But I think we also want to make sure that that doesn't look like what it's looked like before, that it looks like truly what makes up arts, culture, and entertainment throughout the United States, which is incredibly diverse. I want to bring in Matthew from being.
Julie, let me throw in one more thing. Sure. I apologize. I totally forgot. We define society. Society is nothing without arts and culture, nothing. And the pandemic did one thing to us. Entertainment typically does well. It does better during bad economic times because people will spend their last penny to be entertained. We know that vaudeville was born of the Great Depression. People want to be, we are their relief mechanism. Who do the politicians turn to when they have an election campaign? Who does the world turn to when there's Farm Aid and Live Aid? I mean, they turn to us. They turn to the arts and the culture for entertainment, for relief, and for direction. And when we needed the world,
yeah, that's right. a great segue to Matthew because he really represents. Thank you, Michael. I'm sorry to have to rush. It's just there's so many fantastic voices here today. I want to make sure we get through everyone to everyone. So Matthew, come on board here and talk to us about Be an Arts Hero and what are the strategies and policy that you've been working on to achieve living wages and protections for arts workers. And then I'll bring in Jenny as well. And maybe the two of you can be up at the same time. We can have a dialogue together.
Well, thank you, Julie, for everything that you've been doing for the state of California. You're an incredible leader. Californians for the Arts is a beacon of hope in this state and in this country. The work you've been doing is inspiring. Thank you for this month, this week, and this panel. You know, what everyone is saying, Jeff, Maria, Michael, you know, what we're talking about here is an ecosystem, a highly interdependent local commercial ecosystem that creates jobs. We're talking about the American worker. And what's really important about this is there is a deficiency legislatively in understanding creative economy literacy. So we need to engage locally and federally in a creative economy literacy project that educates our legislators, our policymakers, our chambers of commerce, how integral our institutions are anchoring these highly interdependent local commercial ecosystems. We do drive tourism, transportation, we anchor retail, we anchor hospitality. You look anywhere from Raleigh, North Carolina to Anchorage, Alaska. We've been building coalitions everywhere from Alaska down to Florida, from Maine to California, Illinois, New York. And what we find time and time again is there is this incredible hunger for people to be organized that haven't been organized before. And everyone's asking, what can I do? So from the grassroots to the grass tops, it's what can I do? How do I do this? And what I think part of what Be an Arts Hero has learned, and then I'll talk about policy, is, you know, we have a tool very readily available, and I learned this from Narek Rome at Americans for the Arts, CEDS, comprehensive economic development strategies. And what we can do is create locally economic blueprints that center creative enterprise in economic planning that's going to drive jobs. I mean, we know that we're bees everywhere we go. We pollinate these businesses, small businesses. Look at Mass Mocha in North Adams. Look at how we mushroom economies everywhere that we go. And so part of what we learn, you know, we've taken over 70 Senate meetings and dozens of House meetings since July, since we started, and no one can deny the economic impact. And, you know, Michael was saying it's $77 billion. Actually, it's $919 billion as per the Bureau of Economic Analysis's last, their data tables. And, you know, when you talk about airlines, it's much easier for lobbyists to represent the top 10 airlines. It's much more difficult for an organization to represent over 675,000 businesses across the country that are everything from, you know, a cultural space to a recording venue to a live venue. This is and independent contractors. And so Be an Arts Hero represents, and we're building a coalition across the country where we're slowly becoming a 501c4 called Arts Workers United. We want to represent the independent contractors and the leaders of the arts related businesses, commercial, nonprofit, you name it, but particularly 1099 and mixed income earners, because we've been largely left out of the conversation legislatively. And in order to make us a legislative and economic priority, yes, Julie, in answer to your question, I think these many campaigns are part of a larger movement. And I do think that the sooner we can all sing from the same sheet music, the more effective we'll be. But we have to make sure that the contours of what we're talking about are as inclusive as possible. What Be an Arts Hero has been doing is talking about these issues through a purely economic lens. We're talking about jobs, we're talking about businesses, and what the Dawn Act, Defends Arts Workers Now, is intending to do is empower these economic agencies we already have in our government. There's this, you know, ironically, the arts has a story problem. And it's ironic because we're the ones that drive the narrative in this country. The arts and culture are our greatest expression. It's the expression of our democracy. It's one of our greatest exports. And the return on investment is massive. So when you look at the NEA, or the NEH or IMLS or CPB. And you hear from certain congresspeople or senators, oh, these are liberal handouts. Well, actually, no, we need to reframe that narrative. The NEA is not an arts agency. The NEA is an economic agency that specializes in creative industry. So once we can reframe these narratives around these agencies that exist, we can change the story of how federal and local legislators understand what, who, and where arts and culture workers are. And yes, to what Michael is saying, it is the performing artist, it is the custodian, it is the millions of arts administrators across the country, and it's bringing them into the conversation, and it's bringing all the arts-related and arts adjacent businesses into this conversation as well. It's working with the restaurant venues, it's working with dry cleaners, it's working with airlines. We can no longer be relegated and accept the narrative, Julie, as you were saying, of starving artists. We can no longer accept the narrative ourselves of being extracurricular and luxury and an elective in schools. We must be integrated at every level because this is a trade. When I'm in a choir program in school, when I'm in band or orchestra or theater, that's not an elective. That's actually a trade class. And if I go to a conservatory, I'm going to trade school. And if I play a violin, there are many jobs for me in addition to playing violin in the many symphonies in this country or across the world. It's being an administrator, it's being a violin teacher, it's working in arts education. There are many avenues, and we have to think about this from the ground up. So that's, you know, I'm kind of moving in and out of this conversation because it's all related, but we, in addition to federal policy and working in promoting putting creative workers to work proposal that was built by over 100 partners and signed by over 2,300 people, institutions and workers. We worked on Revive and Rebuild in New York and ensuring that independent contractor language was in that, using that as a blueprint for other policy, supporting local initiatives and state initiatives wherever we can. And we want to build a movement. We want to be a part of that movement, but independent arts workers must be a part of that.
Matthew, thank you so much. And my only concern today is that I have so many brilliant people and not enough time. So I just hope that we can do this again. I want all of you to come back and we'll continue the conversation. And I don't want Jenny to be left out here. So Jenny Kuntz, Matthew, thank you. And I know you said you had a 10 o'clock. So, and then we've got our other folks who we're going to bring in from the state perspective. But Jenny, you're a playwright and you've gotten involved in advocating for the arts in this last year, but you describe yourself also as an activist and organizer. You wrote a letter to the Biden-Harris administration that got over 10,000 signatures. What compelled you to write that letter, and why is that important that we have a Department of Arts and Culture at the cabinet level?
Ooh, what a question. Matthew, I feel so fired up after what you just said. I wish we were all in a room together and we could march out into the streets. You know, what compelled the letter was an article in the Washington Post by Peter Marks, basically asking that exact question. Why aren't we represented? And I think to something that Michael said, that is a big realization in this moment where other industries know exactly who to turn to. There has been a moment of pause and some incredible grassroots organizing with so many people who have already been doing the work and carrying the torch for years. And this feeling of now what do we all move toward? And as Matthew said, folks saying, I want to get involved, tell me what to do, where do I turn? And the only thing that I just want to add is just something that I feel like we've been talking a lot about, a shift at the government level. And I also just want to name, I feel like there is an internal shift happening within our field, within arts and culture, saying, I am an arts worker, I have a voice, I am hyper local, this is my community. It's not just New York and LA. And I think that was one of the things that was the most exciting about that letter is, you know, we got so many signatures so quickly and they were, I'm an usher in Virginia. I'm an arts educator in South Carolina. I'm also an arts worker. I also want representation. And so how do we start to change the narrative within ourselves of our importance, our economic importance and the understanding that that voice matters. So we feel empowered to say that when we go to our local government, local arts agencies, and are making demands. That's also an internal shift that feels hugely important, and like a lot of movement has been mobilizing around that in the last 4 months, which feels thrilling and exciting. And within that, how do we keep the core of racial equity and not redoing systemic failures in all these dreams and moves that we're making? How do we keep that at the core?
I think that is the $1 million, $1 billion, $1 trillion question that our industry needs to face and really connect on. And I think with these types of leaders that we've heard from today, I am confident that we can get there. I hate to end this portion of the conversation, but we've got 5 other fantastic state leaders waiting in the wings. Jeff, Michael, Jenny, Nina, Maria, thank you so much for being here this morning. I want to do this again because I want to hear from Jeff again, and I want to hear from Maria again, and I want to hear from Michael again. I want to hear from all of you again. So don't be surprised when you get an email from me saying we're going to do part 2, because I have a feeling of all the people listening here, they are absolutely hungry for more and to hear from you. And hopefully everyone also will get a chance to read about the Cultural New Deal, go to NALOC's website, check out Be an Arts Hero, get on Michael's e-list, and of course, subscribe to Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund. So thank you everyone for being here. And we're gonna switch now to our next panel, and we'll go into that. So I'm gonna try and go fast because I wanna make sure that everyone gets a chance to speak. This was the challenge of having so many wonderful people. So Betty Avila has centered on the intersection of arts and social justice, with particular focus on community building, public space, and youth empowerment. She joined Self-Help Graphics Leadership in 2015, and an organization with a 48-year nationally recognized artistic legacy of empowering the Chicano, and Latinx communities of Los Angeles through the arts. Welcome, Betty. Tom DeCaney is currently the executive director of the California Alliance for Arts Education, and is most recently, before that, he served as the director of cultural affairs at the San Francisco Arts Commission. Welcome, Tom, and I see he can't be on video with us today, so we'll just get to look at his beautiful headshot. Harini Krishnan is a well-known Indian classical vocalist and cross-cultural arts education lecturer in the Bay Area. She currently serves as the vice chair of San Mateo County Arts Commission. And in addition to being an arts advocate, Harini is a passionate political organizer. She served as a former lead volunteer organizer in California for the presidential campaign of VP Kamala Harris, and as a national grassroots organizing lead and state director for South Asians for Biden. Welcome, Harini. Casey Loudermilk. Casey works for Another Planet Entertainment and is currently the assistant general manager at Bill Graham Civic Auditorium. Casey and I work together pretty much on a daily basis, both on reopening guidelines, working with GoBiz and California Department of Public Health, but also as the co-founder of NEVA California. Welcome, Casey. And Kat Willis. Kat Willis is the founder and executive director of the Tannery World Dance and Cultural Center, located in Santa Cruz, San Francisco Bay Area. Kat has served on the Arts Council of Santa Cruz Grants Advisory Committee, the Arts Council of Santa Cruz Grants Panel, and County Parks Friends Advisory Committee. Kat's dedication to racial justice and equity spans a lifetime of education, community organizing, and activism. And she's a founding member of the Santa Cruz Black Coalition for Justice and Racial Equity, and is a founding director of the Black Health Matters Initiative. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much. Oh, Tom, you are able to be on video. I'm so glad you could. All right, welcome, everybody. So I hope you enjoyed that conversation. A little harder to have a conversation, but at least the amazing dialogue from our national representatives. Betty, I wanted to get started with you if I could. Welcome, nice to see you. So Self-Help Graphics is an organization rooted in community, and since 1973 has been at the intersection of arts and social justice, providing a home that fosters the creativity and development of local artists. In your experience, what has been the role of the artists this last year, and how can we best support artists in terms of policy development and advocacy?
Yeah, so I think, and this will echo a lot of what we've heard, but I think one of the most important roles that individual artists have played in the arts as a whole is really just about processing what's happening. We keep getting hit with so many things, right? It's not just the pandemic. It's not just this racial reckoning. It's not just, so much in very specific local communities on a national level. So I think artists have the ability to help us process and understand the world around us. And, when I think about how to best support them at this point, it's really about what are the basic systems and infrastructure that people need to survive, right? I think I go back to something that Angie Kim said, Angie Kim from the Center for Cultural Innovation. She said one of the biggest policies that has impacted individual artists had nothing to do with the arts. It was Obamacare. And so I think when we're looking at this very moment, there's a heavy responsibility that we're putting on artists in the arts sector. And I think they're up for the challenge. We collectively are up for the challenge, but we need to be approaching this work from a place of wholeness, right? Where artists aren't having to worry about paying the rent. They're not having to worry about, health insurance right now. Artists are parents, they're caretakers. And so when we don't have basic needs met, that's when we start to really, I think, feel the burden. And so from Self-Help Graphics perspective, one of the biggest things that we have been focusing on is how do we get paid opportunities for artists? Just whatever it is, even if it's not always, an arts commission, they're not always making a work of art, but their artist perspective, the skill sets that they come with, the problem solving that they bring to the table, we're trying to utilize it as much as possible. And really talking to funders about that too. Going back to what was mentioned earlier, that a lot of artists can't receive grants necessarily. And so, how can organizations like Self-Help and others that are very connected to, these hyper-localized groups of artists be that bridge and make it as easy as possible, right? Like, how do we, as the organization that has the infrastructure, deal with all the paperwork? How do we deal with all of the things that the artists, they don't need to deal with that. They don't have the bandwidth. And so how can we be that bridge and be that support? And I think that as an arts organization and as a sector more broadly, that's something that we can be thinking about in a more long-term way too, right? Because artists need support right now, but the economic impact of this time is going to be felt for many years.
Betty, thank you. I think that's such a, one of the things you said, I wrote down paid opportunities for artists. It's sort of this assumption, and it's been this thing that we've perpetuated in our industry, is the non-paid opportunities for artists. And I think that is hopefully something we do shift in terms of both the infrastructure, but also in terms of policy. And honestly, that is part of what that California Creative Workforce Act that we're trying to do here in Senate Bill 628.
I do want to just add to that one thing. I think that there's and this goes back to what Maria was saying about BIPOC communities and BIPOC artists, and this notion of being a community artist, right? And this, maybe an artist is, their social practice artist or their artistic practice is very centered in community. And there's this assumption that's made, oh, well, you're doing it for the good of the people. You're doing it for the good of the community. And so I think that Self-Help Graphics is often having to change that narrative and help people understand this is still a job. This is still how they have to pay the bills. As much as we'd like to, believe that they could do this work for free, it's just not possible. And I think that narrative gets put so much on artists of color and less so on non-BIPOC artists.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kat, let me introduce you into the conversation. You know, we had an opportunity to meet during a regional conversation. I was just I loved everything you had to say and all the work that you're doing in Santa Cruz County. But in this last year with COVID, you introduced a new initiative, which is called Black Health Matters. Can you share with us a little bit about that initiative and specifically the role artists and arts organizations play in that, in supporting healthy communities and for Black people?
Thank you so much, Julie. I'm so happy to be here today, and with everyone listening to the national conversation was, you know, right, spot on what everyone was sort of talking about. You know, I just want to start by introducing sort of, you know, what I've talked about, I think, when we had that regional conversation, Julie, and that was that really that cultural organizations are the social and artistic intersections of a community. We are the communities that we serve. And so we've sort of been recovering, you know, Tannery World Dancing Cultural Center, which is our organization. We've been in operation for 10 years. And our tagline is access, equity, and excellence. You know, so this idea of, you know, being in recovery or are we in a movement, you know, the whole premise of many of these cultural institutions or organizations and grassroots organizations that are in our communities are there to bring together artists, but really to be the glue that binds communities together. And it tries to leverage the administrative power that we can come together and invest in our communities. We've been underinvested in, there's been underfunding, and in many cases, we're holding these communities together as cultural hubs and cultural homes. These are the legs that we stand on, and they allow for the advocacy to happen, to pool our resources, create opportunities for artists in the communities, and to, you know, leverage a creative mindset so that we can meet the challenges that we have, you know, on a daily basis. So Tannery World Dancing Cultural Center, you know, serves a large portion of Black artists, artists of the African diaspora, families, and community. And we mobilize to respond and put cultural gathering and community at the front of our efforts. Trust is a big part of who we are in the community, and we've built that over time. And Black Health Matters was just the response, the natural response that was happening to the George Floyd murder. The Black community had come together. The Santa Cruz County Black Coalition for Justice and Racial Equity was already doing work in the community and talking with the county about how to reach the Black community and start to work with the Black community to serve. And Black Health Matters was our immediate response to support the community. And we had to think critically about how we could leverage every single dollar that we were receiving from these CARES Act funds to support the community. We mobilized our efforts and we teamed up with civic organizations like the NAACP, the United Way, County Public Health and County Park Public Spaces and nonprofits to build on an infrastructure and to support the work and our efforts that we were doing. So we were really trying to bring together culture, community, and trust and advocacy. And we prioritize the artists and engage with the local Black businesses and put mental health at the core of our focus. And so we wanted to establish a robust mentorship cycle between our leaders, youth in our community, elevate those voices. We utilize the arts as the core of our work and our concept in order for to build the trust and combat the isolation that many were feeling already in our community. The Black community in Santa Cruz County is at 1.7%. And so we had already been experiencing for many years a sense of isolation. And so making sure that we were able to reach more people in the community through the organization that had been embedded there at the Tannery Arts Center, Tannery World Dancing Cultural Center, for 10 years. So we had already established these strong, trusting relationships. And so by coming together with civic organizations and cultural organizations, we were really able to start to advocate in ways that, yes, we had been advocating internally, but this was started to ripple out into the community. And I think it's just really important to remember how much these organizations and initiatives like Black Health Matters, they are essential. They've already been happening for many, many years. Supporting these communities already happens naturally. And so it's vital that we understand that the glue that holds communities together are often organizations that, aren't getting salaries. There's volunteer work happening. The advocacy that's happening for the artists within the community sometimes it's piecemeal over time. So, for us, it was about having an infrastructure of support for the Black community and making sure that civic and cultural organizations could help us achieve that. Most important thing I really want to stress is that, these grassroots, often BIPOC-led organizations are doing the heavy lifting in communities. They are doing the heavy lifting. They are holding communities together. They're often going without salaries. They're often, years and years and years supporting communities. And so I think, even if we're looking at what does recovery look like the individual people that make up these organizations. Recovery looks like the work and embed and trust that's already there, be investing in that, because these are the things that will sustain a community for a long period of time and will move the funds responsibly into a community. So, I'm really excited to hear this conversation and to be part of it, and to know that, equity should have been at the forefront. We're already doing that. The movement was already going on. This just was an exacerbation of what that reality is.
And that critical role that both the artists and these cultural organizations and arts organizations are playing in community, but that have not been invested in at the level that in terms of the return on impact that they're already making and those connections that you're making, as you're saying. And now, hopefully this opportunity, this moment, this once in a generation moment is to actually, as you say, change where the emphasis is and the hierarchy as it were, and making it really an emphasis on not only equity, but really recognizing the amazing, as you say, community power and glue that you act as in all of our communities across California. And our job really is to lift up and amplify those messages so that we can make sure that that's where the funding goes from the public sector. So thank you for that work, Kat, and thanks for sharing that. I wanted to bring Tom DeCaney into the conversation because Tom has been a longtime arts leader in the state and was at the San Francisco Arts Commission for many years. But now you're the executive director of Create California, which was formerly California Alliance for Arts Education. You two have merged. And your focus is on arts ed and policy and to support that. What are you advocating for right now in terms of arts education? And has the narrative changed in this last year? Have you seen something different that you feel that is, has shifted because of COVID that arts education can really highlight?
Well, thanks, Julie, and thanks for having me amongst such a great inspired group of leaders across the country and across the state of California. And to clarify, we're still merging, so I'll soon be the executive director of Create California, but I'm still working closely with my colleague, Pat Wayne at Create California. But I do think what we're seeing is really the illumination of the social ills and the injustice that have lived for a long time. And for many people, have been fighting for a long time. And in the education space, I think we see that in the digital divide in terms of which students were left behind during the pandemic and which students were able to access online learning. And that just kind of highlighted the disparities in public education. So we really are focused on K-12 public education in partnership with all of our arts and culture advocacy partners. And it goes without saying that this year has been a horrific year for students and for teachers and for families on so many levels, and that the kind of inequities within public education very much around racial inequity lines in terms of Black and Brown students, particularly not getting access to the same quality of education as their white and often Asian peers in the state of California. And there's data to show that, and we've known this for a long, long time. But what we're seeing is how that has compounded and impacted the educational inequities within the state of California. So I think what we're trying to look at is how the arts are a part of a recovery and how we can shift the whole framework to public education. I don't think we want to return to quote unquote normal, because it wasn't a great place for most of our students in California. So we've been really focusing on the social emotional benefits that we know that the arts bring to students that have always been a key part of a quality education that includes the arts. And I wanted to take an opportunity for anybody who wants to think about how you can get involved in local advocacy. California is a local control state. So even though state funds are coming, they go to the local school districts, and it's really at the local school district, which we have almost 1,000 school districts in the state of California. So our charge is very enormous to make sure that we're not just advocating at the state level, but then we're turning to look at local accountability and how our school boards and superintendents and administrators responding to actually make sure that they're dealing with the inequities within the system. So I wanted to bring to everyone's attention AB 86, which was signed on March 5th by the governor, which is the COVID-19 Relief in School Reopening Reporting and Public Health Requirements Act. And it's actually distributing $6.5 billion to the state superintendent of instruction, Tony Thurmond. And then of that, $4.5 billion will be going to local school districts for and county offices of education for supplemental learning. And we see that as a real opportunity to think about arts and culture as a pathway for this. And I think we have a moment around what I've heard Betty speak about and others, that this is a coalition moment. I think it's just unprecedented in 100+ years to be able to have an opportunity to think about who are our allies in racial equity work, and particularly for our mission around educational equity. We're watching great work from groups like Ed Trust West, Californians for the Arts. We know you're doing some great work on SB 628. So it's really important that we think who our allies are in the coalition building, because we can't do this alone. This is too big for any one of our organizations to take on. And so looking at I think of this week, we're actually participating in the Collective Impact Forum and thinking from a systems change level, who share our values, who's working on racial equity, and who wants to work with us at the scale we can manage to work at, right? Some of us are working in local communities, our organization statewide. And I just want to thank Californians for the Arts for your leadership on SB 628, because I think it's going to codify the governor's initial $15 million at the California Arts Council. But I think it's just a seed for what we can do in this moment. And I think we have some great allies now in the White House, thankfully, and then also here in the state of California with Superintendent Tony Thurmond and others. So it's been a great partnership, and I just really encourage us all to stay active, take care of ourselves. I think it's super important right now to acknowledge the burnout people are experiencing. There's been so much trauma from a health level. Parents and families are just, they're hurting very much, and particularly in communities of color, BIPOC communities. So how are we supporting people to take care of themselves, to heal? And I think the social emotional role for the arts and culture and education is going to be huge as we look forward.
Thank you, Tom. I think absolutely. And thank you for your leadership. And it's great, Tom and I get a chance to work together. And so we're really excited about that. And I just wanted to just lift up something that's happening in the chat before we introduce our last two speakers. But, Maria said, I wish there was more time to take a deeper dive into policy and advocacy and creating a truly equitable framework that supports arts and culture communities of color, focusing justice on the tired EDI conversations to real Jedi, which I like. We can bring in the, Star Wars references and mind tricks there as well. So we will, we knew that this would be touching on a lot of really amazing points that we hope then will inform our continued conversations as we build on our professional development and advocacy tools for the field. So please come back. And this is, as Betty said, a moment to leverage and finally push this issue over into long-term impact and change. And thank you for that, Betty. I really appreciate those comments. And so But as we know, there's a whole day ahead of us of more panels and sessions that I hope everyone's checking out. And for sure, the closing session, we just added Las Cafeteras. And they'll be talking about their role as artists in social justice, and we'll be playing some really amazing videos. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to have a tequila in my hand at that point. It'll be at 5 o'clock later tonight. So I hope you'll come back and join us all. But before we close out the session, I have two wonderful partners that I work with that I want to introduce. And so Harini Krishnan, you're an artist, you're an amazing political organizer, you're an arts commissioner. Break it down for us. Why does advocacy matter? You're at the forefront, you work in political campaigns. What difference does it make if we engage?
It means our voices are heard. First of all, I just want to say thank you for including me. I'm just inspired by every one of these leaders and these arts champions. My heart's so full right now, hearing from every one of them. And there's a sense of community, there's a sense of kinship and solidarity. And what a great way to start this morning. So thank you for this. I think, I've been thinking a lot about, why is advocacy so important, and what are the common threads between the advocacy that I do in the political organizing space and the arts advocacy space, and what are the lessons that we can learn? I think Matthew said it so beautifully. It's, and I take it further. He talked about, recrafting the narrative, right? Reframing the narrative. And I think it's about storytelling. I think advocacy is fundamentally about, telling stories that enable us, to communicate our values, as lived experiences, rather than abstract principles. And it's about, having the power to move people and inspire change, and, evoking our shared values. It's about motivating people to action. And why is it important? Because you are seen, you're visible, you're heard. This is something that I've been thinking about, when I was working. So I had the pleasure of working, as an organizer for both our VP, Kamala Harris, and as well as on President Biden's campaign, and specifically mobilizing the South Asian community. And I remember going into the community, and trying to get them to engage and be active and join these virtual phone banks and join these virtual text banks. And it was basically about telling them, sharing my story. And I think when you craft your public narrative, you tell them why this is important to you. And you tell them you share your story, it enables a commitment. And that's how you build movement. And the more I shared my story with South Asian community members about getting involved, about having a voice, having a seat at the table, how that will impact and make a difference, the more people got involved. We had 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds who had never been part of any political campaign ever in their life, who would never, other than voting, had never done anything, join phone banks. Join text banks, write postcards in their kitchen tables, right in the middle of a pandemic, feel engaged, feel inspired. And then we had these little circles that grew. It was a snowflake model. It just grew and grew and grew. And I look at arts advocacy, and I look at, the power of storytelling. As artists, we are storytellers. We know how to craft that narrative. And it's using that narrative to lift up the voices of those whose voices have not been heard. I hear Kat, when she's talking about lifting up the voices of my Black brothers and sisters, and centering them in the conversation, and making sure that not only are their voices lifted up, but they're centered and they're leading the charge, right? I hear Betty in talking about the power of community organizing. Listening to all this, I think the one thing that I will say is, first of all, I think there's power in storytelling, and when we make it, craft our public narrative, not only as individuals, but as a community, we can definitely shape the narrative and we can affect change. But I think it's also about coalition building. And I think there were a lot of people that spoke about this. When, as a South Asian community organizer, we partnered with AAPI groups on the ground, whether it was in key battleground states, so that we could be the margin of victory this election in states like Wisconsin and Michigan, states that were not in play before, or partnering with BIPOC groups in Georgia. That was key, partnering with Fair Fight and coalition building. There's strength in that. And I think as an arts community, if we look at what coalitions we've built before and what we can build on. And especially as there's a growing awareness in this country that arts is not an afterthought, that arts is intersectional to every priority in every local county, in every state, in every, every federal priority. And I think that if we do that, if we build coalitions with the healthcare industry, we build coalitions with the juvenile justice organizations, we build and we come together to advocate and share our stories, our compelling stories. We are already at an advantage because we are artists. We know how to share the stories. Every other industry comes to us to help them share their stories. Right? We're already at an advantage. So I think there's power in coalition building. There's power in storytelling. There's power in crafting the narrative. And I think those are the synergies between advocacy in the political space and advocacy in the arts space. And I thank you for having me.
Thank you, Harini. You're such an inspiring political organizer for me. I watch her do so much and really, change our future. So thank you, Harini, for all the work that you do. And speaking of coalition, it's a great transition to my friend Casey, who in this last year became engaged in advocacy, has been in the music industry most of your life, and that's been your career path. And now you're learning how to be a lobbyist. So Casey is the co-founder of NEVA, California National Independent Venues Association. Casey, just take us home now because we only have a couple more minutes, and I apologize, but just what has this last year taught you in terms of inspiring people to that it's not so scary, demystify the process, and then also just give us some action steps so that people know that they can do something today to actually make some changes based on everything we're talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Julie, for including me. Definitely inspired by listening to everyone. Harini, you got me fired up. So this has been a pretty unreal year, as we all know. I work in the music industry. I manage a venue in San Francisco, and obviously first to close, last to reopen. A moment of crisis has brought together all these independent venues across the country. We've been advocating at the federal level. And then, often inspired and engaging with Julie here with Californians for the Arts, we've kind of learned, and we wanted to jump in and help kind of push the train forward, both in the San Francisco Bay Area and in the state. We quickly realized that there were no railroad tracks laid. So we had to go around and organize all the independent venues in our region in the Bay Area. That was the first step: organize, get your community together, get your coalition together. And there's, I think there might be some decorum for people who've been involved in this a little longer than I have, but I just come of the message of I'm a voter. These people represent me. I need to engage with them. I'm going to hit them up. I'm going to call them. I'm going to email them. I'm going to ask for meetings. And there really was no secret sauce. It's just a lot of hard work, organizing, understanding what our broader coalition needs and wants, and advocating for those items. And we've made some great progress in San Francisco, and super excited in the state of California to join with Julie, Californians for the Arts, and California Association of Museums to ask for this kind of bold, once in a generation investment in the arts and culture community. And I think it's really inspiring too, to be able to align with the nonprofit arts community. The for-profit venues haven't really been a part of the nonprofit arts and culture conversation before. And this is, I think, a really amazing moment to align. We're advocating for a bigger pie. We're not advocating for a slice of your pie. So I think that our whole kind of coalition can push that forward in a broader way, and kind of for the first time ever aligning with the nonprofits community. So really excited about that. And what can you do today? Voter voice. We've got a grassroots letter writing campaign. I'll put the link in the chat right now. Sign it, tell all your friends and family and any email lists you've got to sign that. This is us kind of telling our state legislators that this is action that's important, that's needed. And Governor Newsom asked for bold transformational investments with this ARP money. We can't think of a better way for him to spend his money, obviously, than this area. So thank you, Julie. Yes, our money. Yes. Awesome. Thank you.
Casey, it's been a pleasure to work with you. It's been a pleasure to get to know all of you who've been on this call today, this opening session. What an exciting way to kick off the day. When I was putting this together, one of my colleagues said, Julie, this could be the entire day. And I think he was right. I would have loved to continue this with these 11 amazing superstars. Thank you to every one of you who joined us this morning. There's so much more to learn and be inspired by today. We've got 2 panels coming up at 11, Youth Empowerment, just sounds amazing, as well as Intersection Arts and, which is going to talk about arts and social impact and all the different ways that we impact there. If you want to come meet me and spend some more time with me and just listen to some great videos that we're going to get from some of our legislators celebrating Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month. That's very casual meeting style brown bag lunch at 12:45. We got Speaking Truth to Power, bending towards justice in the creative industries. Very much, some of the thread that we were talking about this morning will be developed more in a meeting session that's going to be moderated by board member Leticia Buckley and our programs associate Jade Alicia Rivera. And then we also have Artists as Essential, the Creative Workforce Movement. That'll be moderated by Gustavo Herrera from Arts for LA, with some amazing leaders in the state of California on what this looks like and how we can center artists as essential. We'll do a workshop where speaker Anthony Rendon will join us at the top of the hour at 3:15 to talk about how you can be a better arts advocate, or how you can be an arts advocate. And Ron P. Muriera, our vice president, along with Keisha Dumas-Heath from our board as well, will give you some really practical steps on to build your advocacy movement. And then we close with an amazing session, both in honoring Larry Baza with Senator Tony Atkins, the leadership of the Senate, in honoring him, as well as Las Cafeteras from Los Angeles. We'll talk about their work in social justice, what they're doing in Georgia right now, how you and as an artist can be inspired to engage in arts and activism, and what is the role of the artists today in our world. And we know what it is. We love all of you. We are so grateful you're here today. It's going to be a great day. We have amazing sessions for you. And thank you again to all of our panelists this morning. And this is just the beginning. Are we in a campaign, or are we in a movement? We want to say we're in a movement, and we're going to make it happen together. Thank you so much.